So today I'm here with Mckenzie. So Mckenzie, tell me a little bit about yourself and what do you do?
I am a student at Western. I'm a psychology major. Right now I'm a advisor for Subaru. That's my job. And I consider myself to be an intersectional feminist.
Great. So what does social justice mean to you?
Social justice pretty much it's justice for marginalized groups and oppressed groups. That's pretty much as simple as I can make it.
Yeah. Are there any particular groups that you promote social justice for in your life?
I think that I support largely trans community, and I kind of support people depending on like the time and the place I'm in. So when we were talking about a lot of like black rights, especially considering Mike Brown, I was really supportive of that, and it just depends on what's popular to support and like what I think I can lend a hand in supporting. If I find a cause, especially right now for trans rights with the bathroom debate, I find it like it really needs to be talked about, and I think I can help that. So that's what I support generally, like women, trans, and like people of color.
Yeah. What do you think about the access to gender-neutral bathrooms on Western's campus?
I personally like them. I wish there were more because I find it that it's really difficult for me to personally find some. There's like one or two that I know of, like off the top of my head. The other ones, I have no idea where they are.
Yeah.
So I know they have a map online, but I don't want to look up a map to go find a bathroom.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like the bathrooms on campus in general are really inaccessible to anybody, to people with different abilities, because a lot of them are on like second floors and stuff. And so like, I think especially in regards to trans people, like it'd be even harder to find a bathroom that they identify with and feel comfortable in.
Yeah, not only that, the bathrooms that are for trans people are actually for people with disabilities as well, so they're kind of coupling that together, which is kind of a touchy subject, but I don't know. I don't like that they're on the second floor either. I have to travel up a flight of stairs to go to the bathroom. That's kind of silly.
Yeah, like in Bond Hall, there's no bathrooms on the first floor.
That's true, and I don't understand why.
Yeah, the bathrooms are so inaccessible. But anyways, how do you promote social justice in your daily life?
I'm very radical, and sometimes I get like really impassioned and like I go on really long rants to people that I know. I don't generally, when I don't feel safe doing it, I don't like start talking about feminism and, you know, all this stuff. I try to educate people, and if I realize that they're either ignorant or not knowledgeable at all on this subject, I kind of try to educate them politely and kindly, and if they disagree with me still, I'm not going to force it, but if I know them a little bit more and I know that they're not going to be like super violent or aggressive, I will probably try to be somewhat more aggressive about my tactics of like, this is why this is important to me, and I get really emotional about it, which also helps with the whole convincing them this is important. And then, you know, I also try to like talk about how like, why aren't we talking about statistics for trans people? Why aren't we talking about statistics for like women of color? Like with the pay gap, a lot of people don't consider the fact that the 75% or 75 cents per dollar that the woman makes, it's based off the white woman.
Right.
And not off of like the Latina, the black woman, and those are significantly less.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I just rant a lot.
How do you promote social justice at Western?
At Western, it's really difficult because I don't live on campus. I would like to go to Queer Club, but I never seem to have the time. They don't have a very accessible time slot for people who work and also live off of campus. I do try to attend a lot of the like queer and LGBT type like events or feminist events. They have a lot of like talks and things, and those things like they're fast, they're easy. I don't have to like interact with too many people or like be a part of a club to know and like consistently go to know much about it. So that's kind of like I try to support like the events that are for social justice.
What about in your classes and in your major?
In my major, I write a lot of papers from a feminist lens. I ask a lot of questions from a feminist lens. I've had classes to where they don't talk about, they only talk about cisgendered people, heterosexual people. They don't consider people, like I had a developmental psychology class where they only considered, men and women, and they only considered men and women that got married and have kids. That's not everyone's life, and I constantly wrote papers in response to this, and the teacher didn't really like me that much, surprisingly, but I constantly questioned, and I kind of just brought it about, and a lot more people started to realize oh yeah, gay people exist in the class, and they would ask questions similar. So
it's interesting to me that the professor didn't like that, because I feel like in college they talk a lot about developing critical thinking skills and using those skills to question these systems, but then once you actually start questioning the systems and the things that the professor is presenting, then they shut down, and it's oh no, you can't question me, but you're not actually questioning them necessarily. Get defensive. Yeah,
she didn't like that I basically questioned the statistics that were part of the field. I was just basically saying, well, technically we aren't really sure if these people were men or women. You couldn't say that for sure. They could have just not been out as trans, and also you didn't include trans people. How can this be an accurate representation of everyone? And she didn't like that I debunked her statistics, so that's basically where she didn't like my ideas, essentially. She didn't like the critical thinking that I had because it debunked a lot of what she had as theories and stuff in a lot of her writings.
Interesting. So how have you learned about social justice within your major specifically, or haven't you learned about social justice?
My major has a horrible history of unethical practices. Only recently has it been geared towards social justice. It's been used more often than not for bigotry, saying women are lesser than men, and that homosexuals are sin, and I don't know, there's a lot of theories that said they were lesser than people, essentially, these marginalized groups, and it's the same thing. They actually said things like that, I think around Civil War era, about black people, where they had smaller brains or something, and they were less civilized naturally. So yeah, there's just a lot of not cool stuff. What I did was I kind of just I was a feminist before I became a psychology major, so I brought my own perspective in, and a lot of recent psychologists now are starting to study gender and questioning whether or not they're really different as far as mannerisms, as far as physical attributes, which it's kind of been now considered that maybe we're not all different at all. So maybe just physically people are different, but not mentally or emotionally.
Yeah. So do you not talk about it a lot in your classes? You kind of have to bring in that perspective?
A lot of the time, the classes that I'm taking are the basics, the bare bones, and we're not talking about gender or sex. We're talking specifically about brain function and things like that, or theories. And some theories are super bigoted, and I do have to bring in well, what about why are women different? But there is no feminist lens in the psychology, in the beginning of psychology, the major itself. Just, how do I phrase this? It's just the good old boys, That's what the club is. All of the famous psychologists throughout history tend to be men, and that's why it's not through a feminist lens usually. I also want to fight Freud.
Tell me more about that.
Well, Freud, we actually talked about this in our feminist class. I'm going to call it that. I'm not going to call it by its real name. But we talked about how Freud's psychoanalysis and psychosexual, I believe it's psychosexual theory, he talks about how women and girls have penis envy, and that they believe they were castrated, so they're envious of their fathers for having a penis, and they are just oppressed, essentially. He does say that women are oppressed because of their lack of penis, which was a great thing to say, but at the same time he said they were lesser, they weren't men, essentially. And essentially that they had to identify eventually with their mothers who didn't have a penis, but because they didn't have a penis, they would always envy the fact that guys had a penis. And I just said penis probably 12 times. But that's essentially what it is. He thought that people who were marginalized were supposed to be because of their anatomy. He made up things that didn't make any sense. He made a lot of speculation without using any kind of experiments that were ethical at all. Mm-hmm. And he just observed people and he just made guesses. Mm-hmm. And a lot of his ideas and theories have been debunked. A lot of people still believe in them, which is why I want to fight him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The kinds of like theories and theorists that are presented in classes really frustrate me, because like how you were talking about how they're generally from a white cisgender heteronormative perspective, and in my human development class in human services, literally almost every single time my professor brought up a new theory, he was like, but you have to recognize that this is from a white male perspective, because generally all the theories that are considered important are the older ones that are only written by white men, because those are the only people that were allowed into this space. So I think it's like so important to like fight Freud and like fight these ideas and bring like people of color and women and everybody into the situation so that they can start, so everybody can start working together to like create new theories that,
or maybe even adjust old ones.
Yeah.
That could actually be an accurate thing. I mean, some of them just really just need like to include other people other than just white men, and they would probably be generalized very easily. Mm-hmm. While others are just absolutely wrong, like Freud. Freud's existence is wrong. But yeah, I definitely agree that I think that people should definitely be included. I think that we need to have more resources for these people, mm-hmm. when there's not very many resources being made, especially at this school. They don't really help out people who are marginalized. They don't really help out people who are oppressed. And there aren't many people like that on this campus as well. Like, you don't see many people of color. It's really frustrating. And they, like many campuses, they have this way of just like pretending they're all about diversity and all that, but I don't know if it's Western's fault that they're not accepting students of diverse backgrounds, like that aren't essentially white and like maybe heterosexual and maybe like cisgendered, but they're also, I don't know if it's their fault or if there aren't as many wanting to apply for college or for this college. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that it is the case that people do want to apply for the college. It just, I have no idea. That's a question that I'd love to know the statistics on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that segues great into my next question. Do you think that Western does a good job or not in representing and supporting marginalized students?
No. I think that I really appreciate the existence of the trans bathrooms, and they're trying to include it, but overall, that's the only thing they do. The clubs are very inaccessible to people who have jobs and lives outside of school, and there aren't many programs available for people of different backgrounds. It just, even as someone who knows that there's a club for gay people and trans people, and there's a feminist club, I just feel like so unwelcome. And it's not only because of Western, also the student base are very aggressive and angry. They're very serious about like the causes, and if you say something wrong, it's not because of Western, obviously, but people get really, really aggressive and call out culture exists, things like that. So I don't think Western is doing a very good job, but I also think the student body also helps in that not doing a great job.
Mm. That's an interesting perspective. That's the first time I've heard this and talking with people. But I think that's super interesting. And you mentioned call-out culture. And one thing that we talk about in human services, like a lot of people say check yourself, which I think is important to check yourself when maybe your biases or are getting in the way of your thinking, privilege. Right, or your privilege. However, I think that's a very, like, especially if you say it to other people, that's a very aggressive way to approach that and saying, like, oh, you need to check yourself on this and this and this. I think, it's definitely valuable to kind of, like, learn those skills to, like, teach people and, like, talk about it in a less aggressive way.
I think that saying check your privilege is a good thing, but when it's in an aggressive way, I think like you were saying, it definitely is detrimental because it makes people afraid to talk, which is why I don't like necessarily going off on people because they said something offensive. I like to ask why they said it. You know, I like to ask, like, do you think that's okay to say? And then we'll kind of talk about why I don't think it's okay to say, and they'll tell me why they think it is, or they're like, oh, that makes sense. I never realized. To call out someone is not fun. It makes them feel really unsafe, and it can cause people with anxiety disorder extreme bouts of anxiety.
Right.
It's not fun.
Right. Yeah, that's something that I've experienced in the Human Services program, and I know that I've talked with other students who've experienced that when people will say, like, oh, you need to check yourself, you need to check your privilege, and, like, call people out on things. It really does, like, I generally don't say a lot in my classes anyways, but it makes me even more afraid to, like, have an opinion.
Right.
Especially as, like, a privileged, white, heterosexual person. And so it's definitely hard. So that's an interesting perspective you bring about, like, the student body and the club not necessarily being welcome because of that.
And, like, in classes as well, it happens. Yeah. And I've been to events and stuff, and people have been really aggressive. Like, the event I went to a couple weeks ago, where I basically watched a porno. They didn't preface that, but that's what I watched. And they were being really aggressive, and they wouldn't let anyone else have a different opinion from them. But I think that if I could go back, I would definitely have said something like, you know, technically, if you're going to try to silence my opinion because you don't agree with it, that's not a very good way of doing that. If you want to have an actual argument or debate, that's different. But also kind of like the call-out culture, the checking your privilege culture, it usually focuses on, like, little things you say. Like little things, little words that you say that are still in your language that you're trying to get out. Or maybe that you didn't say, like, you didn't include trans people in your sentence. And it's not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things if you're trying to talk about all those people and that's kind of just implied. But I think that people just focus too hard on people's individual language, that they need to police it. That's part of call-out culture, I think. I don't know.
In my diversity and social justice class last quarter, we created guidelines that we wanted the class to follow in order for it to be, like, a safe space. And one thing we talked about is language. And, like, I know, like, in the culture, like, a lot of people like to say, oh, you guys, blah, 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 blah. And I'm trying to say y'all instead, which is funny because a lot of people make fun of me for it because it's, like, I don't know.
No, I completely understand. I make fun of people for it, too.
Yeah, but it's interesting because there were, other than, like, not saying you guys, it was, like, don't say, like, that's crazy, don't say that's weird, because, like, that oppresses people, like, of different abilities, and it's just, like, it's important to, like, consciously think about those things, but, like, there's a point where it's, like, sometimes, like, you don't need to be constantly, like, policing that, and I think
that even in an academic space, you can speak casually.
Yeah.
I think that if you do use that in your regular speech, you're not a terrible person.
Yeah.
It's not like a complete hate speech. It's not like you're trying to denounce this entire subsect of people.
Yeah.
You can comfortably say things that you might have even just misspoken. And that's fine. You don't need to be yelled at.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's why, like, I mean, it's important to, like, have guidelines like that to, like, make sure it's a safe space, but, like, there's a point where it's, like, you don't need to be called out for every little thing, and, like, I guess that's what I'm, like, I noticed that in my classes.
We have Elizabeth in our class who sits right near us, and she told me that she's actually afraid of like saying certain things specifically because she doesn't want to get yelled at. And whenever she talks about like a subject that she seems knowledgeable about, she's like, don't quote me on this because I don't know the exacts, or she'll just make sure that you don't quote her on it, because if someone were to research it later and be like, well, you're wrong or something, and or someone were to challenge her idea or challenge that that's not really what happened, it just shows that she has some kind of anxiety because of being called out, and just like because of the way people respond to people inaccurately saying quotes or not presenting it in the best way or something.
Yeah.
That's just something I've noticed.
Yeah.
It makes me really upset.
Yeah. What are some ways you think that like professors at Western as a whole, and in classes, that we can start changing this and start trying to support underrepresented students? What are some things that you think Western can do?
Honestly, I just think that they should have more activities throughout the day. I don't think they should just have them like at a certain time. I also think that they need a better way of, I swear, I only learn about events after they've happened, and there's so many different venues of places you can find out about events, but it's not in all one place that I can just find. There needs to be a more centralized area where I can just see exactly what's going on around campus. I don't live on campus. I know that they have like billboards and everything, or bulletin boards, and it doesn't help me, and I don't know if you personally like look at them or if you're able to, but I just feel like I miss out on a lot just because I don't know what's going on. And then I think it would be nice if professors, like our feminist professor, liked the subject or thought that it was important for people to talk about, especially if it pertains to the class and it's social justice oriented, that they just said, hey, there's an event going on this date, because people will probably go. That's just my thing.
Yeah, so more making it so students are more aware of these more social justice oriented events. Yeah, for sure. And that's one thing I feel like our professor does. And then my one of my political science professors, he always offers extra credit for social justice things that are related to especially race, because it's a race politics and public policy class. So I think that's great when professors announce that. I don't know, does your major send you emails when that kind of stuff is happening?
Once in like a blue moon, I will get an email from like, oh, we're gonna do this like really small event that you're probably not gonna be able to attend because it's like really late at night. And the good thing is they'll send it to me like at least a week ahead of time, which is nice, but usually I don't get that much time like for other events, because I'm just told like the day of or the day before, hey, there's an event that you probably are interested in. Do you want to go? I don't have time. I have plans. Sorry. But and it doesn't really help when like they do that, because sometimes they do. I don't know. I forgot what I was complaining about.
Are there any like specific programs or like departments or groups on campus that you'd like to like shout out to that you feel like are doing a great job of promoting social justice?
I think that the Queer Services Group, or just the Queer Services Department in general, I really like what they're doing. I think that it's still necessary. People don't think, for some reason, people thought when marriage was legal, when marriage became legal, they thought that was the only thing that was what we needed. There's so much more. There's so many other queer things that are necessary, trans things, especially with the bathrooms. But I really like what they're doing. As far as that, I know that we have a feminist group on campus. I think it's exclusionary towards women, from what I remember. I can't remember what it's called, though. It does start with a Q, but I know that they throw on some events that I've gone to, and I really like them, but I just can't remember exactly what they're called. I'd have to look that up. Don't quote me on that.
That's interesting that they're pretty exclusive to women.
Well, I remember them being only exclusive to women and like trans women when I signed up for campus. So like when I was a freshman, which is like a couple of years ago. So it might have changed. They might have decided that feminism is for everyone, like it's supposed to be. But I don't know. But they do throw on some pretty good events. I've gone to a couple that were just amazing.
So my last question, if you could say anything to anyone at Western, whether it be the administration, the president, the professors, about social justice and promoting social justice for marginalized groups, what would it be?
Let me think about that for a second. I think that they need to make the spaces more accessible. So that's just something that I've said like throughout this whole thing. Is just, it needs to be more accessible to people because a lot of people here have jobs. They work. They don't have extra time during the night to do stuff. They need more than just one time a week to be able to feel in a safe space. And also they need to kind of just bring out more awareness of where these places are. Because I couldn't tell you where the hell the Queer Services organization is anywhere on Western. I don't know. I'd have to bring out a map or Google it because they don't really just set that up. They really should just like send out a whole pamphlet. This is where this amazing office is, you know. I know we have a lot of different groups for marginalized people, but they're hard to find, I guess.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for letting me interview you, and I appreciate your perspective.
Thank you so much.
Cool.